things that go into a great album.
The idea that you can listen to the whole thing, obviously, from top to bottom.
Good lyrical content.
Variety.
The musicality.
Records that are timeless.
Albums where the songs hang together very nicely, but they're all quite different.
Fear and pain.
Not, like, contrived.
Not trying to make hit singles out of each song.
The vocal, the way it lays in the track.
A certain kind of concentrated focus.
Sound, mixing.
Things that maybe you want to pick up an instrument.
They're albums that still sound very fresh today.
Something that I can put on and listen to the whole way through, and at the end of it feel that I've just, you know, I've been given something special.
I'm Jeff Bridges. Welcome back to VH1's 100 Greatest Albums of Rock and Roll. There are thousands of artists who have recorded great songs, but the list of acts with great albums is a little more elite, and that's who we're saluting. The musicians who are able to sustain their genius over two sides of vinyl or the duration of a CD. Picking the 100 greatest albums was not an easy job, so VH1 got some help. Here's how the list was determined.
VH1 polled over 500 musicians and rock journalists, asking them to select the greatest albums of the last 50 years. Elvis Costello, Carole King, Britney Spears, Sly Stone, and many others cast their vote. But the results have been kept confidential, until now.
Now, before we get back to the countdown, take a look at the 20 albums you might have missed. In 1977, the world was shocked by the death of Elvis Presley. Around the same time, a young performer born Declan McManus was bold enough to take the King's name, and with this album, he started to claim his own place in rock history.
Thick glasses and pigeon-toed posture made Elvis Costello an unlikely rock star. But with the release of his 1977 debut, My Aim Is True, he became a hero among music fans starved for something new.
Watching the detectives, don't get cute. Watching the detectives.
Costello was a struggling computer operator when he recorded the album, which was a top 20 UK hit within weeks of its release.
Elvis Costello, My Aim Is True, was an album I remember very clearly from high school. It was sort of anthemic. It gave us that kind of like, wow, we're kind of cool, but we're kind of brainy too feeling.
Everything means less than zero.
Because of his anguished persona, Costello was viewed as a product of UK's punk underground. But a closer listen to My Aim Is True proved he was something else, a gifted singer-songwriter who tackled the personal and the political with equal wit and passion.
He seems to like words. He seems to actually like being imaginative and thoughtful with them and building little card houses out of words.
With their 1991 debut, 10, Pearl Jam arose from the Seattle music scene to claim their place as one of America's leading rock bands.
The record was actually, it was a very quick and very spontaneous kind of thing. We had almost all the material written within 2 separate times of Eddie coming up for about a week at a time.
Formed by Mother Love Bone bandmates Stone Gossard and Jeff Ament, Pearl Jam took shape when vocalist Eddie Vedder got a hold of Gossard's demos.
We had an instrumental tape with like 8 or 9 songs, and he ended up singing over 3 of them, and we hung out and just like fell in love with music again. Eddie was perfect.
At home, drawing pictures of mountain tops with him on top, lemon yellow sun.
I think it's a very raw and very young sounding record, which is exactly where we were at that time.
Featuring Vedder's raw, soulful voice against a hard rock backdrop, 10 displayed the talent that would keep Pearl Jam in rock spotlight long after the hype surrounding grunge had faded.
I like the sound. I think really believe in their music. I mean, that's all you need.
Released in 1967, Jimi Hendrix and the Experiences' Axis Bold as Love was their most sophisticated musical effort to date.
We never really had much time to rehearse things. It was really like in the studio, hey, I've got this idea for a song, you know? And he'd go through the structure of the chords and, you know, give it a shot.
While continuing his mastery of 6-string pyrotechnics, Hendrix also wrote a surprisingly delicate ballad, the sad but hopeful Little Wing.
He was just it for me, as guitar players go. I mean, he was just it. He was something that just came out the blue, had his period, and went. Yeah. It was like magic.
Axis is the first Hendrix album in the countdown, but there's more ahead. When we return, James Taylor bears his soul.
I've seen fire and I've seen rain.
And the Beastie Boys make an art of sampling.
It's the joy.
When the 100 greatest albums of rock and roll continues. When the Beatles formed their own label in the late 60s, this next artist was one of the first they signed. A few years later, the success of this album placed him in the forefront of the early 70s singer-songwriters.
I'm a cement mixer, baby, a churning urn, a burning.
22-year-old James Taylor ushered in the era of the confessional singer-songwriter with 1970s Sweet Baby James.
Yeah, I'm a cement mixer, baby, a churning urn, a burning phone.
Sweet Baby James has just got something about it between him and Russ Kunkel and those guys. It was just an innocence about it.
Take to the highway, won't you lend me your name?
Most of the album's songs were autobiographical, inspired by Taylor's stay in a mental institution and his struggle to kick a drug addiction.
Mama don't understand it. She wants to know where I've been.
At the time, James Taylor was going through a lot of personal stuff. It just comes across. That's what he's singing. He's singing about James Taylor.
But you know I could feel it. Walking on a country road just yesterday morning, they let me know you were gone. Suzanne, the plans we made put an end to you.
With sentimental songs like Fire and Rain, the album went on to go triple platinum, making Taylor one of folk rock's brightest stars.
Well, I've seen fire and I've seen rain.
I'm proud of Sweet Baby James. I think there are good songs on it, some well-written songs, and I think it was like I say, it changed everything for me.
But I always thought that I'd see you again. La, 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 la.
In 1972, Aretha Franklin triumphed with one of her most personal albums, Young, Gifted, and Black. At her 60s peak, most of Aretha's songs were interpretations of other people's material. But Young, Gifted, and Black's biggest hits were two Aretha originals, Daydreaming and Rock Steady.
That title describes Aretha, and that's exactly what she was, young, gifted, and black.
The songs Rock Steady and Daydreaming really stood out.
The album was an ambitious blend of funk, gospel, and soul, unified by Aretha's almighty voice and all-powerful delivery.
When she opens her mouth, all of this passion and this fire comes at you.
It sold fewer than 100,000 copies, but the Replacements' Let It Be was a landmark album that helped bridge the gap between punk and grunge. Released in 1984, Let It Be was the Minneapolis Quartet's most commercial album to date, combining the reckless energy of their live shows with introspective lyrics and pop melodies.
Let It Be is a great record.
It was real and original and different. It has total bravado, and at the same time, there's this vulnerability in other songs. I think I walked around for about a year being that album.
Look me in the eye and tell me that I'm satisfied. Look me in the eye, satisfied.
That album is just such a statement. It's got in-your-face songs, it's got sad songs. Let It Be has just about everything you need.
Shortly after the album's release, the Replacements signed with a major label, but they never achieved the success of the bands they inspired.
Like the Replacements, the group at number 74 got their start in the early 80s as a hardcore punk band. But by the end of the decade, they had taken punk's rebellious spirit in another direction.
After the success of the juvenile License to Ill, many had the Beastie Boys pegged as one-hit wonders. But 1989's Paul's Boutique proved that the three white rappers from New York City were more than a novelty act.
Paul's Boutique was significant because the Beasties made a record they didn't care what anybody thought, and they wanted to make an antithesis to License to Ill.
Mike D, King Ad Rock, and MCA traded raps over funk and old school rock. then drop doses of psychedelic sound and experimental effects.
You know, I really love to do your hair sometimes.
The cool thing about that record is it showed there was so much depth to the Beastie Boys after License to Ill. It was such a departure from that previous record, and there was so much experimentation, so much like sampling. It just showed there was so much to this band.
Compared to their multi-platinum debut, Paul's Boutique was a commercial disappointment. But the album's obscure funk samples and pop culture references proved to be ahead of its time.
I think it's probably the best sample-based record ever made. It still had a nice pop sensibility to it, but it had such an interesting layered quality, and it reflected New York culture at that time really, really well.
1994's Grace was the only full album Jeff Buckley released in his short lifetime, but it proved the singer-songwriter a lasting source of beauty and strength.
It's a beautiful record. The thing that strikes you, I think, most of all is his voice. I mean, it's a singer's record, in my opinion.
The son of folk hero Tim Buckley, Jeff received immense acclaim for his debut. But the younger Buckley's sound was all his own, featuring dramatic vocals and bittersweet lyrics that explored themes of pain and survival. At age 30, Buckley drowned while swimming in the Mississippi River, ending the career of one of the 90s most promising young artists.
The reason why I think that record is a great album is just the uniqueness of hearing a man sing so beautifully, and the record to me spills with emotion the whole time.
I think he had one of the best voices I've ever heard. Grace, I think, is the best album of the 90s.
In 1968, Jimi Hendrix released his third and final studio album, Electric Ladyland.
It really was his opus, because it was when people left him alone, let him make the album he wanted to make, and it was as close to it as you're going to get with him.
Electric Ladyland is amazing. And it's loose, and it's tight, and it's just, his guitar playing's awesome.
What I'm doing now is working on breaking it down, really, as where it hits him right dead in the chest.
As he had revolutionized the electric guitar, Hendrix now shifted that same energy towards the studio, scoring his first and only top 20 U.S. hit, a howling
Along the Watchtower, Jimi Hendrix.
Bob Dylan was so impressed with Hendrix's electric version of All Along the Watchtower, he ditched his own version and began performing the song Jimmy's Way. Now up next, one of soul music's sexiest voices.
He's one of the best at what he does. Great singer.
New Jersey's gift to rock and roll, and Zeppelin takes off when the 100 greatest albums of rock and roll continues. We're back with the first of 3 albums in the countdown by the founding fathers of heavy metal. Production of this album's intricate cover delayed the release date by months. But for fans of the band, it was worth the wait.
In 1975, after an almost 2-year hiatus, Led Zeppelin launched their new Swan Song label with the release of their ambitious double album, Physical Graffiti.
Physical Graffiti by Led Zeppelin, I think it has the biggest variety of what Led Zeppelin were doing at that time.
That's a record that shows like a band at the height of its prowess, especially for a double record that's so long. There's not any track on there that you would ever skip over.
Flying skies of fortune, each a separate way, on the wings of maybe, and downy birds of prey.
The songs of Physical Graffiti were a blend of styles grounded in Zeppelin's hard rock tradition, including the band's Eastern-flavored tour de force, Kashmir.
Kashmir. That's the track that everybody off that record went running around going, oh my God, have you heard Kashmir?
I actually saw them play, and it was unbelievable. They opened with Kashmir. I thought someone punched me in the chest with a Buick.
Physical Graffiti represented everything Led Zeppelin had done and pushed their new influences even further, capturing the band at their most experimental and creative. In 1973, Al Green's fusion of deep gospel music and smooth 70s soul found its greatest success with the album Call Me. Green continued working with the High Records production team to create his trademark sound of sparse orchestration and emotive vocals.
All I can say about that album in Al Green period is like, you want somebody to fall in love, just put some Al Green on.
From the very first time I became aware of Al Green, I was a fan. And if you go see Al Green right now, you will be entertained.
Oh, baby, I'm in no hurry.
Within a few years, Green would leave pop music behind to become a gospel minister, but his influence on R&B was already set in stone.
Al Green is probably one of the most soulful singers that I've heard. Just the things he does to audiences. I mean, he's so cool.
Sit right down and talk to me about how you want to be. You ought to be with me. Yeah, you ought to be with me.
He's one of the best at what he does. Great singer.
Raw power.
Raw power.
Raw power. It's just kick-ass rock and roll.
In 1973, Iggy Pop and the Stooges exploded through the remnants of psychedelic pop with their third and last studio album, Raw Power.
Raw power is sure to come around.
We did really well with the social deviants, high school dropouts, people with lousy jobs, alcoholics, drug addicts. We did great.
Featuring blaring guitars and fiery vocals, the band delivered raunchy garage rock that paved the way for the punk revolution.
I'm a street walking cheetah with a hat full of napalm.
The whole punk scene, I don't think, would have happened hadn't it been for the Stooges.
If there ever was an album title that summed it all up in 2 words, that was it, Raw Power.
I am the world's forgotten boy, the one who searches and destroys.
With Raw Power, the Stooges managed to create an album that remains a perfect example of shocking nonconformity.
Like you put on their records now, they still work. It was just this flat-out, violent, sexual, genius band.
It all changed for me when I saw the cover of Raw Power in a record store. And I saw a picture of Iggy and I thought, who is this? And that album introduced me into a whole other world.
In 1973, the next artist, he made his debut and he became one of the many musicians hyped as the new Bob Dylan. But by the time he released this album 5 years later, it was impossible to confuse him with anyone else.
After a 3-year hiatus, Bruce Springsteen released 1978's highly anticipated Darkness on the Edge of Town.
Lots of energy on that record. Great songwriting. Bruce at his best, but when is he not at his best?
Following his breakthrough Born to Run, Springsteen struggled with lawyers and managers to take control of his career. Darkness reflected his frustration, with bleaker lyrics and a grittier sound.
I wasn't interested in making the same record twice. I always was moved on to other things that I wanted to write about.
Darkness at the Edge of Town was just extraordinary. You had all these brand new songs. They were very free. They were enormously proud sounding songs.
In 1968, the Rolling Stones passed on psychedelic experimentation and returned to their blues roots with the release of Beggars Banquet.
After Satanic Majesty's Request, after that record, they made Beggars Banquet. The way it sounds and things, that definitely is a living, breathing kind of vibe. That's the way they were living, and that's what comes across.
Let me introduce myself. I'm a man of wealth and taste. I've been around here for many a long, long year. So many a man's soul and faith.
The combination of traditional Delta blues and their own brand of decadent rock and roll defined a new image for the Stones and remains one of their most influential recordings.
Pleased to meet you. Hope you get my name. Yeah. But what saved you is the nature of my game. Mean it.
Sympathy for the Devil, Street Fighting Man are just timeless classics, are just unbelievable songs.
That album is just an amazing album. They're on the brink of developing a totally different sound, a more like hard rocking kind of sound. They're just about to leap off the cliff into like greater things.
Described as one of the definitive jazz recordings, Miles Davis's 1959 album, Kind of Blue, represents an important piece of American musical history.
Kind of Blue was the first album that really brought jazz home for a lot of people. It was representative of what jazz musicians were doing but it was still at the same time accessible.
I like a lot of rhythm, broken rhythm. I like strong melodies.
With a band including Davis, John Coltrane, and Bill Evans, Kind of Blue introduced jazz to a new modal technique in an accessible format and solidified Davis's reputation as a trailblazing musical force.
Passion and soul and animalism and consciousness and humanity and fear and love. You hear all of those things without any language whatsoever. An amazing thing. Be given so much specific information about being in the world without having any of it happen in language.
One thing about Miles, though, he was always known for his great ability to recognize new talent. Many of the sidemen in Davis's band would go on to become legends in their own right, including John Coltrane and Herbie Hancock. Coming up, a blaxploitation classic.
Curtis Mayfield's Superfly. I mean, he took you right to the heart of the ghetto.
The band of the 80s gets a 90s makeover.
Every album we go in to make is a different experience.
And the results of our viewers' poll for the greatest album of the 70s. Next on VH1's 100 Greatest Albums of Rock and Roll.
Here's a look at the results of VH1.com's poll for the greatest albums of the 70s.
Welcome back to VH1's countdown of rock's greatest albums. The next band is known more for their political views and their sense of humor, but they did name this album after a line from a Mel Brooks comedy, The Producers.
After conquering the world with the Joshua Tree, U2 boldly decided to change their image and start over with a brand new sound on 1991's Achtung Baby.
Every album we go in to make is a different experience and a completely different result.
It's alright, it's alright, it's alright. She moves in mysterious ways.
The band used studio technology more than ever before, making a move toward the rhythms of dance music and industrial rock.
Rattle and Hum was the album that we were experimenting with American music. And Achtung Baby was like, let's get back to Europe and see what's happening there.
As the band experimented with new effects, Bono's lyrics also turned in new directions.
One must be political at times, but sometimes you have to look beyond that to just the state of the human spirit.
When all you got is hurt, one love, one blood, one life, you got to do what you should.
Proving that the band of the 80s was ready for the 90s and beyond, Achtung Baby was as adventurous as it was successful. In 1969, Miles Davis revolutionized jazz with the release of his groundbreaking double album, Bitches Brew.
Bitches Brew was one of those albums that broke the mold, and it was a stretch. His phrasing and the things that he does with the melody, much more intricate, much more hard-edged, and much more cerebral.
By introducing rock textures and funk rhythms into his mixture of classic and free jazz, Davis ushered in a new musical style called fusion.
Miles was always like the Picasso of our world, but Miles doesn't need a name. He was the Miles Davis of our world. He loved change. He loved to grow. But not only did he make the changes, but he led it.
The trumpet player's fastest-selling album ever, Bitches Brew opened up the realm of possibilities for musicians in all genres and found Miles Davis once again at the forefront of music's cutting edge. Years after leaving the Impressions, Curtis Mayfield scored the biggest hit of his career with the soundtrack to the 1972 blaxploitation film Superfly.
Curtis Mayfield's Superfly, I mean, he took you right to the heart of the ghetto and told you how the situation was.
I'm your mama, I'm your daddy, I'm that nigga in the alley. I'm your doctor when you need, want some coke, have some weed.
Mayfield felt the film glamorized drugs and violence, so he aimed to undercut the sensationalism by writing songs about the bleak future facing the film's characters.
Superfly totally synthesized the drama of the streets. You know, because people that live the street life, you know, they're really actors in their own action drama, and he gave them a soundtrack.
Everybody's misused him, ripped him up and abused him. Another junkie plan, pushing dope for the man. A fed is on the corner now. If you want to be a junkie, why?
Curtis Mayfield was an incredible lyricist. Even if you were not from the inner city, you could understand through his lyric the black experience.
Mayfield's social commentary didn't overshadow the music. Superfly's funk lives on in countless samples in hip-hop and R&B.
You're gonna make your fortune by and by. But if you lose, don't ask no questions why. The only game you know is do or die.
Superfly is the first of 3 movie soundtracks in the countdown. To find out which other soundtracks made the list, you're gonna have to keep watching. We'll be right back with a folk rock supergroup.
We are stars, golden.
And the godfathers of West Coast rap. Stay tuned.
Here's a look at the top 5 albums on Jackson Browne's ballot.
Running blind, running to the sun, but I'm running behind.
We're back with the final 2 albums in this hour. When this album was released in the late 80s, it altered the landscape of the rap world, but it was an achievement nearly eclipsed by controversy.
It was the album that put West Coast rap on the map.
Straight out of Compton, crazy motherfucker named Ice Cube, from the gang called niggas with attitudes.
Straight Outta Compton was probably the first way that an artist from the West would appeal to some of the East Coast censors.
With its tales of graphic violence and criminal activity, N.W.A.'s 1988 release Straight Outta Compton was praised by some for calling attention to the realities in South Central Los Angeles.
And N.W.A. Straight Outta Compton, all that G music, I just go get it because it was real, it was my life that somebody else was telling. You know what I'm saying?
But the harsh language alienated radio programmers, and the incendiary lyrics of one of the songs made the group a target of the FBI.
Police and Red said it with authority, because it's on the street is a majority of gang. It's with whoever I'm stepping, and a nigga that their weapon is kept in a stash spot.
They say we bad influence, we promote violence and everything. Number one is we don't. It's just like they try to hide what's going on, and we tell it like it is, you know.
But that shit is work, I just laugh, because it gives them a hint not to step in my path. For police, I'm saying, you punk.
N.W.A. had the tape that you wanted to run to your boys and be like, yo, 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 check this out, listen to this, and press play, you know what I'm saying? And then, like, instantly, they was hooked.
All you got to do now is press yourself. I'm expressing with my full capabilities.
and now I'm living in correctional facility. So when you see Dre, a DJ on the mic, ask what it's like we're getting hyped tonight. Cause if a strike, it ain't for your good health, but I won't strike if you just spread yourself.
4 years after the album's release, N.W.A. disbanded. But the sparse beats and dark visions of Straight Outta Compton had already changed hip-hop forever.
N.W.A. was like, that's when I think we really saw hip-hop's promise.
In 1970, folk rock trio Crosby, Stills and Nash teamed up with Neil Young to release the album that would encapsulate both the optimism and the unrest of the late 60s, Deja Vu.
We are scattered, we are golden, we are
CSNY is a group of singer-songwriters, and we write about everything, love and peace included, death and war included, because it all exists.
Carry on, love is coming.
The foursome's unique vocal blend ran seamlessly through the album's tender pop and harder-edged rock songs, rounded out by the guitar interplay of Stills and Young.
Well, they already had their method of making records that they developed with their first album, and when I came in, I added some things to the mix, and one of them being that it's nice to play all at once, and we can do some things we just play and sing and do that.
Musically, it amazed me because they were only in their mid-20s when they made it, and the musicianship on it is wonderful. The songwriting is really sophisticated. I can't think of any album that's ever been made that I've listened to more than Deja Vu.
CSNY would break apart shortly after, but Deja Vu remains a shining example of the musical chemistry they created together.
I'm proudest of the fact that we have made a difference in people's lives. We have used the gifts that the muse of music gave us for the correct reasons.
Don't you ever ask them why, if they told you you would cry, so just look at them and sigh. I know they love you.
We still have 60 albums ahead on our way to #1, so be sure to tune in for the next hour of VH1's 100 Greatest Albums of Rock and Roll. I'm Jeff Bridges. See you then.